Martha Donovan didn't beg. Not when they put her name on a wanted poster. Not when they burned her office to the ground. Not even when the last stage driver threw her bags into the Wyoming dust and told her she wasn't his problem anymore. She stood in the middle of that sun-cracked road alone with a ledger pressed against her chest like a shield, and she made herself one promise: she would not run. She would not hide. She would make them answer for every name in that book. If this story already has your heart racing, subscribe to this channel, hit the bell, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The summer heat in the Wyoming mountains didn't cool down at night. It just changed its character from a dry, burning weight that pressed down on a man's shoulders all afternoon into something denser after dark. Something that sat in the lungs and reminded every living creature on that ridge that water was a privilege, not a right. Caleb Walker had been awake since 4 in the morning. Not because anything was wrong. That was just when he woke up. Had been waking at that hour for 11 years ever since the war left something broken in his sleep that no amount of hard work had ever managed to fix. He'd given up trying. A man learned to make peace with the parts of himself that didn't heal clean. He was at the water trough when he heard the stage road. Not the coach itself. The coach didn't run this far up the ridge anymore, not since Langford's railroad made the old mountain routes unprofitable and half the way stations had shut down. What he heard was hooves, more than 2 horses, moving at a pace that wasn't natural for men who were simply passing through. Caleb set down the bucket. He didn't reach for his gun. Not yet. But his hand dropped to his belt the way it always did when something in the air shifted, slow, deliberate, not panicked. A man who grabbed for a weapon the moment he felt uneasy was a man who'd already lost half the fight. He waited. 4 riders came up from the South Trail. They wore dark coats despite the heat, which told him everything before they even opened their mouths. Nobody wore dark coats in Wyoming in July unless they were trying to tell you something about who they worked for. The man in front pulled up his horse about 15 feet from the fence line and looked down at Caleb the way men who carried institutional authority always looked at men who didn't like the ground itself belonged to them, and everyone standing on it was there on borrowed time. "Caleb Walker," the man said. "That's the name on the deed," Caleb said. "We're Pinkerton agents. We're tracking a fugitive, a woman by the name of Martha Donovan. She's wanted for the theft of federal financial records belonging to the Continental Railway Corporation. We have reason to believe she may be in this area." Caleb looked at the 4 of them. He looked at the way their hands sat near their holsters. He looked at the horse in the back, the one that wasn't carrying a rider, the one with rope coiled on the saddle. "What reason?" he said. "That's agency business, Mr. Walker." "You're on my land," Caleb said. "That makes it my business." The lead agent's jaw tightened. He had the look of a man who was accustomed to doors opening the moment he said the word Pinkerton, and Caleb's flat refusal to perform the expected deference was clearly registering as a problem he hadn't budgeted for this morning. "We're simply asking if you've seen her," the agent said, adjusting his tone toward something that was trying to be patient. "Heavy-set woman, brown hair, traveling alone. She may have approached your property in the last 2 days." Caleb said nothing. And in that silence from somewhere behind him, from the direction of the barn he'd left unlocked last night because he was a fool who sometimes still believed in basic human decency, he heard a sound, a shift, a boot on dry straw. He didn't turn around. "Haven't seen anybody," he said. The lead agent studied him for a long moment. Men like that were trained to read faces, and Caleb's face had never given anybody much to read. That was a gift he'd been born with, and the war had perfected. "We'll be in the area," the agent said finally. "If she makes contact, you're legally obligated to report it. Obstruction of a federal investigation carries consequences, Mr. Walker." "I'll keep that in mind," Caleb said. They turned their horses and rode back down the South Trail without another word. Caleb waited until the sound of hooves faded completely. Then he turned and walked to the barn. She was behind the second stall partition, pressed against the wall, with a leather satchel clutched to her chest and her eyes wide and steady, in a way that told him she was frightened but had made a decision not to show it. She was exactly what the agent had described, heavy-set brown hair traveling clothes that had been through several days of hard use. There was a cut on her left hand, half wrapped in a strip of cloth that had done its job about 12 hours ago and was now just decoration. She looked at him like she was waiting for him to decide something. He looked at her like he was trying to figure out what he'd just done. "The barn latch was broken," he said. "I need to fix that." "I didn't steal anything," she said. Her voice was steadier than he expected. "I want you to know that before you decide what to do with me. I know it doesn't matter to them, but it matters to me that you know." That's a long explanation for someone who's been in my barn for, he looked at the impression in the straw, at least 6 hours. 7, she said. "I came in before midnight." He exhaled through his nose. "You need water." "I need a lot of things," she said. "But yes, water first." Her name was Martha Donovan, and she told him most of the true parts of her story. Over the next 2 hours, sitting at his kitchen table with a cup of water, she drank in careful, controlled sips, like she was rationing it even when there was plenty. She'd worked for the Continental Railway Corporation's accounting division for 6 years. She was good with numbers, had always been good with numbers. She said it without arrogance, just the way a person states a fact about themselves that they've simply always known. She'd started noticing discrepancies in the land acquisition records about 8 months ago. Small things at first. Payment amounts that didn't match the deeds. Signatures on transfer documents that didn't match the individuals named. Dates that preceded the legal registrations by weeks. "I thought it was clerical error," she said. "I flagged it to my supervisor." "And," Caleb said, "my supervisor reported it to the regional director." She paused. 3 days later, my supervisor was transferred to a position in Baltimore with no explanation. The week after that, I was told my contract was under review. "That's when you knew." "That's when I stopped pretending I didn't know," she said. "There's a difference." He watched her hands around the cup. They were steady now. He suspected they'd been steadier than most people's under worse conditions. "The ledger," he said. She glanced down at the satchel on the chair beside her. "It's a copy. I made it by hand over 4 months working at night in my own apartment from memory and from documents I had legitimate access to as part of my position." She looked up at him. "They can call it theft. What they can't do is say the numbers are wrong." "What's in it?" Caleb said. "Land acquisition payments made to shell accounts, false deed transfers, 2 rail line right-of-ways that were established by forced displacement, meaning Langford's men told farming families that the federal government had already purchased their land when no such purchase had occurred." She paused. "And the names of 4 federal officials who received payments to authorize those displacements." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "How'd you end up on my road?" he said. "A woman in Cheyenne told me there was a ranch up the North Ridge Road that was far enough from town that the Pinkertons wouldn't bother with it as a first sweep. She said the man who owned it was—" Martha stopped. "Was what?" Caleb said. "She said you were the kind of man who didn't answer questions you hadn't been asked." He almost said something to that. He didn't. "You can stay in the barn," he said. "One night. Tomorrow, I'll figure out what to do about the rest of it." Martha looked at him with an expression he couldn't fully categorize. It wasn't gratitude exactly, and it wasn't relief. It was the look of someone who had been running hard enough and long enough that they'd stopped expecting to be helped and who was now recalibrating. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "I haven't decided anything except that I'm not going to hand a woman over to men with a rope coiled on their saddle." She looked at him sharply. "There was a rope," she said. It wasn't a question. "There was a rope," he confirmed. Something changed in her face. Not fear. Something harder than fear. Something that had been abstract about her situation until that moment and had just become concrete. "All right," she said quietly. "One night." She was wrong about the one night. The Pinkertons came back the next morning at dawn, and this time, they didn't come up the South Trail. They split 2 men on the South Trail, 1 man circling from the East Ridge, and the 4th approaching on foot from the tree line to the north, which told Caleb that whoever was running this operation was not stupid and had spent the night repositioning. He had been awake when they moved into position. He'd seen the East Rider from the loft window. He went to the barn. Martha was already awake, which didn't surprise him anymore. She was sitting against the wall with the satchel in her lap and her eyes at the barn door, and when he came in she looked at him and said, "How many people?" "4," he said. "Same as yesterday, but they split up." "The South Trail is the obvious exit," she said immediately. "That's where they'll expect movement." "Yes," he said. "The East Ridge leads to the Hartley Creek crossing," she said. "Does the creek go north?" He looked at her. "You memorized the terrain." "I memorized every map of this county I could find before I left Cheyenne," she said. "Does the creek go north?" "For about 2 miles," he said. "Then it hits the canyon." "So it's not an exit," she said. "It's a bottleneck." She was quiet for 3 seconds. "They're not here to catch me. They're here to contain me until more men arrive." Caleb had come to the same conclusion about 90 seconds after he'd seen the East Rider. "Yeah," he said. "Then we need to change what they're expecting," she said. "We," he said. She met his eyes without flinching. "You already made a choice, Mr. Walker. Yesterday morning when you told them you hadn't seen anyone. You're already in this." He hated that she was right. "What are you thinking?" he said. "I'm thinking they expect me to run, and you to either help me run or turn me in," she said. "I'm thinking nobody in that calculation expects us to stay exactly where we are and make them come to us." "That's not a plan," he said. "That's a position." "A position is the beginning of a plan," she said. "What do you have in that barn that they don't know about?" He looked around the barn the way a man looks at something he's lived with so long he's stopped seeing it. "High ground access through the loft," he said. "The north wall is reinforced. I rebuilt it 2 winters ago, double-planked oak. And the well is inside the fence line, not outside it." "So we have water and cover," she said. "What about the main house?" "Root cellar has a secondary exit," he said. "Comes out behind the woodpile on the west side." "Then we're not trapped," she said. "We're positioned." She looked at him with those steady brown eyes. "Can you buy us until midday?" "What happens at midday?" "There's a federal marshal who runs the Laramie Circuit," she said. "His name is Aldous Briggs. He's not Langford's man, I checked. If someone can get a message to Laramie by morning, he'll ride." "It's already morning," Caleb said. "I know," she said. "Do you have a fast horse?" He thought of the bay mare in the south paddock. She was fast. She was also in the south paddock, which was currently being watched by 2 men in dark coats. "I have a fast horse that's currently between me and 4 Pinkerton agents," he said. Martha was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Is there anyone in riding distance who'd do this without asking too many questions?" Caleb thought of his neighbor Hector Reyes, whose spread was 3 miles up the West Ridge. Hector was 62 years old and had a deep personal and well-documented dislike of railway corporations that dated back to when Continental's men had tried to run a spur line through his family's orchard without so much as a letter of notice. "Maybe," Caleb said. "How do we reach him without going through them?" Martha said. Caleb thought about it. It was a real problem. The West Trail crossed open ground for half a mile before it hit the tree cover, and any man on a horse crossing that ground was visible from the south position. On foot, moving through the ravine behind the smokehouse. 18 minutes, he said. On foot through the ravine, staying low. "Can you do it?" she said. "Can you hold the position here if I'm gone 18 minutes?" he said. She looked at him steadily. "Do you have a second rifle?" He stared at her. "Do you?" she said. "In the house," he said. "Winchester, left side of the door." "I know how to shoot," she said. And she said it the same way she'd said she was good with numbers, like a simple fact about herself, not a boast. Not well, but enough. He looked at her for a long moment. He'd known her for less than 24 hours. She'd come out of nowhere, landed in his barn, handed him a problem that could get him killed, and was now sitting in that problem with the composure of someone who'd had a long time to make peace with the possibility that this was where things were going. "Don't fire unless they come through the fence line," he said. "If they call out, don't answer. Let them think you're not here. And if they come through the fence, then fire," he said. He went through the ravine low and fast, the way he'd learned to move through the war. Not reckless, not slow, just efficient. A man moving like he meant to get somewhere without being seen. He'd been good at this once. He was still good at it. Hector Reyes was at his breakfast when Caleb knocked on the back door. "Caleb," Hector said, and looked at his expression and put down his fork. "How bad?" "Pinkerton," Caleb said. "4 men. Woman on my property carrying evidence against Victor Langford." Hector was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. "Langford," he said. "Langford," Caleb said. Hector stood up. "Who do I ride to?" "Federal Marshal Aldous Briggs, Laramie. Tell him a woman named Martha Donovan has documentation of land fraud, and she needs federal protection before the Pinkertons find a way to make the documentation disappear along with the woman." Hector was already reaching for his hat. "That's a hard ride to Laramie and back." "I know," Caleb said. "I'm 62 years old," Hector said. "I know," Caleb said. Hector looked at him. "Those men try to push through your fence." "Not yet," Caleb said. "Then I better ride fast," Hector said, and he went out the back door at a pace that reminded Caleb that 62 wasn't as old as it used to be. Caleb went back through the ravine. The property was exactly as he'd left it. Martha was in the loft window, which he hadn't told her to do, but which was the correct tactical decision. She had sightlines from up there that she didn't have from the barn floor. She saw him coming and gave no signal, which meant nothing had moved while he was gone. He climbed up. "Hector's riding," he said. "Good," she said. She had the Winchester across her knees. She hadn't fired it. "Anything while I was gone," he said. "The East Rider moved south to join the other two," she said. "The man on foot is still in the tree line. He hasn't moved in 40 minutes, which means he's either waiting for something or he's the patient one." "The patient one is always the most dangerous," Caleb said. "I know," she said. He looked at her profile the way she was watching the tree line with the same focused, unsentimental attention she'd given the numbers in her ledger when she talked about them, like a problem that required clear thinking and nothing else. "Why accounting?" he said. It came out before he'd decided to say it. She glanced at him sideways. "What? Why did you go into accounting?" he said. "For a railroad, of all things." She was quiet for a moment. "Because numbers don't lie," she said. "People lie. Men in suits with nice offices lie constantly and badly, and they've been doing it so long they don't even notice anymore. But numbers." She paused. "Numbers just sit there and tell the truth, and all you have to do is read them." "Until someone finds out you're reading them," Caleb said. "Yes," she said. "Until then." The man in the tree line moved at 8:30. He came out, slow hands visible, walking toward the fence like a man on a pleasant morning constitutional, which was the oldest and most transparent version of the approach Caleb had ever seen. The man was either inexperienced or he was bait. "Don't move," Caleb said quietly. Martha didn't move. The man stopped at the fence line. "Mr. Walker," he called out. "We don't want trouble. We just want the woman. You hand her over, we're gone before noon. Nobody has to have a bad day." Caleb said nothing. "Mr. Walker, I know you can hear me. You're a reasonable man. A reasonable man knows when a situation is beyond his—" "You're trespassing," Caleb said. His voice carried without effort. "Get off my fence line." A pause. "Mr. Walker." "That wasn't a complicated sentence," Caleb said. Another pause. Then the man stepped back from the fence. He walked back toward the tree line at the same measured pace, but his shoulders were different going back than they'd been coming forward. Martha exhaled beside him. A single controlled breath. "They're going to wait us out," she said. "I know," Caleb said. "Do you think Briggs will come?" she said. Hector Reyes doesn't make a hard ride for nothing, Caleb said. If the marshal's worth anything, he'll come. Martha looked at the satchel beside her. And if he's not worth anything? Caleb looked at her. Then we find another way, he said. She looked back at him, and something shifted in her expression. Not relief, not hope, but something more durable than both. Something that looked like she'd been carrying a very heavy thing alone for a very long time and had just discovered that the ground under her feet was more solid than she'd expected. She didn't say thank you again. He was grateful for that. They stayed in the loft through the rest of the morning, watching the property line, watching the tree line, watching the south trail for anything that moved. The summer heat built as the hours passed. The kind of heat that had no sympathy and no schedule, that just kept stacking itself on top of whatever had come before it. Martha didn't complain about the heat. She didn't complain about anything. At one point, around mid-morning, she opened the satchel and took out the ledger, the hand-copied one, 4 months of careful secret work, and went through 3 pages of it without explanation, just checking numbers against what was in her memory, making sure everything was still as it should be. He watched her do it and thought about what kind of person sits in a barn loft with 4 armed men on the perimeter and uses the quiet time to audit her own documentation. He decided that was a particular kind of courage, not the loud kind, the kind that doesn't announce itself. Caleb, she said without looking up from the ledger. It was the first time she'd used his name. Yeah, he said. Thank you, she said. I know I said don't thank you yet, but I want to say it now in case... She stopped. In case later is complicated. He looked out at the tree line. Later's always complicated, he said. Say it now if you want to say it. She looked up at him then, just for a moment. Thank you, she said. He nodded once, turned back to the tree line. And they waited. The marshal didn't come by midday. Caleb knew it before the sun hit its peak. He knew it the way a man who'd spent years reading weather and terrain and the behavior of animals under pressure knew things not from evidence exactly, but from the accumulated weight of too many small signs pointing the same direction. The Pinkertons hadn't pulled back. They hadn't repositioned. They were settling in, which meant they weren't afraid of a federal marshal arriving, which meant either Hector hadn't reached Laramie yet, or Marshal Aldous Briggs was not in fact the man Martha believed him to be. He didn't say any of this out loud. Martha figured it out on her own around noon. He's not coming, she said. Not a question. Not yet, Caleb said. Hector should have reached Laramie by 9, she said. Even on a slow horse, even with the canyon road. She was quiet for a moment, looking at nothing in particular. Which means either something happened to Hector or the marshal isn't coming. Or the marshal is coming but taking his time about it, Caleb said. Men who take their time when a woman's life is at stake, she said flatly, are not men I'm counting on. She looked at him. We need another option. I'm working on it, he said. Tell me what you have, she said. He didn't have much. That was the honest answer, and she'd earned honest answers. The Pinkertons had effectively sealed the south and east approaches. The north trail through the ravine was still open technically, but it was on foot only, and it came out 3 miles up the ridge at a position that was exposed and high, and would require crossing open ground to reach anything useful. The west approach through Hector's land was the route Hector had already taken, which meant if they were watching for movement, they were watching that direction now. There's a man in Copperfield, Caleb said. Judge, name of Everett Crane. He's not federal, but he's circuit. He has jurisdiction over land disputes in this county, and land fraud falls inside that. Martha went very still. Crane, she said. You know him, Caleb said. He signed 2 of the deed transfers in the ledger, she said. The silence that followed that statement was the kind that changed things. Caleb looked at her. You're certain? I copied the signature myself, she said. 4 months of nights, Caleb. I am certain of every name in that book. She pressed her lips together. So we have no judge and no marshal and 4 armed men on the perimeter. What else? I've got a neighbor on the east side, he said. Woman named Clara Sutton, widow. She runs 40 head of cattle by herself, and she has a son who rides dispatch for the territorial governor's office. Martha looked at him. The governor. The governor, he said. Langford has connections to the governor, she said. I've seen the payment records. You've seen a lot of payment records, Caleb said. That was my job, she said, and there was something in her voice that wasn't quite bitterness, but was adjacent to it. I was very good at my job. He thought about Clara Sutton. He thought about whether a dispatch rider to the governor's office was compromised or just employed. He thought about how many people in this territory had names in that ledger that Martha hadn't told him about yet, and whether the number was larger than the number of people whose names weren't in it. What about a newspaper? He said. Martha turned to look at him fully for the first time in an hour. What? She said. A newspaper, he said. If the information in that ledger goes public, if it's printed and distributed before Langford can suppress it, then making you disappear stops being a solution to his problem, becomes a bigger problem. She stared at him. That's... She stopped. What? He said. That's actually smart, she said. And she said it like she was genuinely surprised, which he found both mildly irritating and, for reasons he didn't examine too closely, slightly amusing. There's a paper in Copperfield, he said. The Sentinel. Editor's name is Paul Greer. He's been writing against the railway expansion for 2 years. Small circulation, but he's connected to papers in Denver and Salt Lake. If it goes to Denver, Martha started. It goes national, Caleb said. Yeah. She sat with that for a moment. Then she said, We have to get the ledger to Greer. We have to get the ledger out of this barn first, Caleb said, and then through 4 Pinkerton agents and 12 miles of open road. She looked at the satchel. Then she looked at him. Can you copy it? I'm not a bookkeeper, he said. You don't have to be, she said. You just have to copy numbers, accurately. I'll tell you what's important, which columns, which dates, which names. We copy the critical pages and we split them. They can't suppress what they can't find in one place. He looked at her. She'd been running for weeks. She'd been hiding in his barn. She was sitting in a loft with a rifle she'd admitted she couldn't shoot, well surrounded by men who'd brought a rope. And she was problem-solving. All right, he said. They worked for the better part of an hour. Martha directed, and Caleb copied. His handwriting was nothing like hers, large and angular, where hers was small and precise. But the numbers were right, and she checked every column twice before she let him move to the next. When they finished, she folded the copies and he put them inside his boot against his right calf, where they would stay regardless of what happened to the satchel. If we get separated, she said. We won't, he said. If we do, she said firmly, you get those pages to Greer. He looked at her. And you? I'll figure out the rest, she said. That's not a plan, he said. He was using her own words from that morning. He saw her register it. No, she said. It's a position. The corner of his mouth moved, just slightly. He turned back to the window before she could see it properly. It was around 2 in the afternoon when the situation changed. The man on the South Trail, the one who'd been stationed there since dawn, wasn't there anymore. Caleb noticed the absence before he could explain why it felt wrong. And in the time it took him to process it, a second absence registered. The east position, which had been consistently held all morning, was empty. They're moving, he said. Martha was already looking. 2 positions gone, she said. That means they're consolidating. They're going to try the fence line. Or, Caleb said, someone arrived. They both heard it at the same time. Horses on the South Trail. Multiple horses moving faster than the Pinkertons had moved this morning, moving like men who weren't worried about being heard. Martha's hand went to the Winchester. Caleb put his hand on her arm. Not forcefully. Just there. Wait, he said. The riders came into view from the South Trail, and Caleb counted them not 4, but 7, and the man at the front was not a Pinkerton agent. He was old, maybe 65, with a silver star on his chest that caught the midday light, and he was riding the kind of horse that said he'd made good time and knew it. That's a marshal's badge, Martha said. Yeah, Caleb said. Briggs, she said. Probably, he said. Don't move yet. The marshal pulled up at the fence line and called out in a voice that had been doing this for 30 years. Caleb Walker, my name is Aldous Briggs. I'm the federal marshal for the Wyoming Territorial Circuit. I've been informed you have a witness under your protection. I need to speak with that witness. Caleb climbed down from the loft. Martha followed without being asked. When he opened the barn door and walked out into the heat of the afternoon, the 4 Pinkerton agents were still visible, 2 of them standing near the tree line, 2 near the south paddock. All 4 of them now watching the marshal's party with the careful recalculating attention of men who'd just had their operational parameters changed. The marshal looked at Caleb. Then he looked at Martha. Ma'am, he said, touching his hat. Are you Martha Donovan? I am, she said. I understand you have documentation of criminal activity involving Victor Langford and the Continental Railway Corporation. I have a ledger, she said. Original copies, 4 months of documentation, land fraud, bribery of federal officials, forced displacement of at least 3 farming communities, and evidence connecting 2 of those displacements to acts of violence against landowners who refused to cooperate. The marshal was quiet for a moment. That's a significant list. It's an accurate list, she said. He looked at her steadily. Then he looked at the Pinkerton agents. You men are operating under a warrant issued by the Continental Railway Corporation's legal division, he said. That warrant is a private matter and carries no federal authority on this property. You'll stand down and remove yourselves from Mr. Walker's land within the next 10 minutes, or I'll be charging your employer with obstruction of a federal witness. The lead Pinkerton agent, the same one who'd given Caleb the speech about legal obligation that morning, looked like a man doing a very fast calculation. He looked at the marshal's 7 riders. He looked at Caleb. He looked at Martha. This isn't over, he said. Get off my land, Caleb said. They left. It took 8 minutes. When the last of them disappeared down the south trail, Martha let out a breath that she'd apparently been holding for several hours. Caleb heard it and said nothing. Marshal Briggs dismounted and handed his reins to one of his deputies. He walked toward them with the measured pace of a man who'd learned not to move fast unless moving fast was necessary. He was looking at Martha the whole time. Miss Donovan, he said. Hector Reyes rode a hard night to reach me. He said you have evidence that could end Victor Langford. Yes, she said. I want you to know something before we go any further, Briggs said. I had a conversation with my territorial supervisor 2 weeks ago. He told me to stay out of anything connected to the Continental Railway expansion. Told me it was a federal matter above my jurisdiction. He paused. I want you to know that I am telling you this, so that you understand I know exactly what I'm stepping into by being here. Martha looked at him carefully. Why are you here then? She said. Because Hector Reyes told me a woman with evidence was about to be handed over to men with a rope on their saddle, Briggs said. And I've been a marshal for 30 years, and in 30 years I've never once handed a witness to men with a rope. Something shifted in Martha's face. The same thing Caleb had seen that morning in the loft. Not relief, not hope, but something that had more weight than either of them. The ledger documents payment to 4 federal officials, she said. I don't know yet which levels of the territorial administration are compromised. I want you to understand that. I understand it, Briggs said. Is the documentation solid? It's as solid as numbers can be, she said. Which is completely solid. Briggs looked at Caleb. You've been harboring a federal witness. I've been running a ranch, Caleb said. Briggs looked at him for a long moment. Something like dry acknowledgement moved through his expression. Right, he said. He turned back to Martha. Here's what I can offer. I can take you and the documentation to Laramie under my protection. I can connect you with a federal judge, one I personally vouch for, not a circuit man. And we can begin building a formal case. How long will that take? Martha said. Months, Briggs said honestly. Maybe longer. And in the meantime, she said, Langford's men know I'm alive, and they know what I have. They don't stop because you rode out here. No, Briggs said. They don't. Martha was quiet for a moment. Then she said, the Copperfield Sentinel. Briggs looked at her. Greer's paper. You know him, she said. Everybody in this territory knows Paul Greer, the marshal said. Man's been a pain in the railway's side for 2 years. If the key documents run in print before Langford can move against the legal process, Martha said, it changes the calculus. They can pressure a judge. They can reassign a marshal. They cannot unpublish a newspaper story that's already running in Denver. Briggs was quiet. He was thinking. Caleb could see him thinking the specific, careful thinking of a man who understood jurisdictions and consequences and was running the math on both. That's not strictly my department, Briggs said. No, Martha said. It's mine. Another silence. I'll escort you to Copperfield, Briggs said finally. After that, what you do with the information is between you and Greer. Caleb had been listening to all of this from 2 feet away. He'd been listening and doing the thing he always did, which was calculate risks, the way other men calculated mileage automatically without sentiment. The Pinkertons had left. That didn't mean they'd gone far. 12 miles to Copperfield on an open road with a woman carrying evidence against one of the wealthiest men in the territory and a marshal's escort that Langford's people now knew existed and could plan around. I'm riding with you, he said. Both Martha and the marshal looked at him. Mr. Walker, Briggs started. 7 riders, Caleb said. She needs 8. Briggs looked at him. Whatever he saw in Caleb's expression, it didn't invite argument. Can you ride in 20 minutes? Briggs said. I've been ready since 4 this morning, Caleb said. Martha looked at him. She didn't say anything. But something in the set of her shoulders changed, not softening exactly because Martha Donovan didn't soften, he was already certain of that. More like a weight redistributed. Like she'd been carrying something awkward and alone and had just shifted it to a better position. He went to saddle the bay mare. The ride to Copperfield was 12 miles of road that Caleb knew better than most men knew their own kitchen. He rode near the back of the marshal's party, not from any tactical calculation, but because riding near the back meant he could see everything in front of him and react to anything that came from behind. Martha rode in the middle of the group between 2 of Briggs's deputies with the satchel across her lap and her back straight and her eyes moving over the terrain, the way his eyes moved, not looking at any one thing but watching everything. He noticed that. The way she watched. About 4 miles out, one of the deputies pulled alongside Caleb. Young man, maybe 25, with the look of someone who'd been doing this job long enough to know when to ask questions and when not to. He'd apparently decided this was a when-to situation. You're Walker, the deputy said. The one who kept her overnight. Ranch hand responsibilities, Caleb said. The deputy looked at him sideways. 4 Pinkerton agents and you just kept her. They weren't invited, Caleb said. She was. The deputy was quiet for a moment. She really have what she says she has. Ask her, Caleb said. I'm asking you, the deputy said. Caleb looked at the back of Martha's head at the way she was sitting in the saddle straight and steady, despite what had to be genuine exhaustion checking the ridgeline with those clear calculating eyes. Yeah, he said. She has it. The deputy nodded and pulled back into his position. They were 3 miles from Copperfield when Caleb's instincts fired. He couldn't explain it as anything more specific than that a shift in the quality of the air, a stillness in the brush along the left side of the road, the way his horse's ears went forward and then sideways without any obvious cause. Marshal, he said. Quietly, not urgently. Briggs was experienced enough to respond to quiet rather than urgent. He turned his head without stopping his horse. Left ridge, Caleb said. 2 minutes out. Briggs didn't look at the left ridge. A smart man never looked directly at what he'd been warned about. How many? Can't say yet, Caleb said. But they're there. Briggs called back to his deputies in a tone that sounded conversational and wasn't. 2 of them pulled forward around Martha without making it obvious they were doing it. The formation tightened. Martha had caught it. She hadn't been told anything, but she was watching Caleb's face, and she'd seen something in it. And now her hand was resting near the satchel, in a way that was different from how it had rested before. "Don't run," Caleb said, pulling alongside her. Quiet enough that only she could hear. "Whatever happens, don't separate from the group." "How many?" she said, same as Briggs. "Don't know yet," he said. "Langford's men or Pinkerton's," she said. "If Langford knew we were riding today," he said, "could be either." She exhaled through her nose. "He knew," she said. "He always knows. That's the thing about a man who owns half the territorial communications infrastructure." She paused. "He knew the moment I got on a horse with a federal marshal." Caleb processed that. "The telegraph in Copperfield," he said. "And the one in Laramie," she said. "And probably the one at the Hartley Creek station." "Then Greer's paper is the only option," Caleb said. "Once it's in print, it has to get to Greer first," she said. The riders came out of the left ridge fast, not from ambush exactly, more from intercept, which was a different thing. 4 horses cutting across the road ahead of them at an angle that was designed to force a stop. The man at the front was not a Pinkerton agent. He was wearing a business suit under a riding coat which was almost insane in the summer heat, and he had the look of a man who paid other people to do things and was personally offended at being present for this particular task. "That's Harlan Voss," Martha said. Her voice was completely flat. "Langford's legal director." "He's a lawyer," Caleb said. "The most dangerous kind," she said. "The kind who does whatever the money requires." Voss pulled his horse to a stop in the middle of the road and held up one hand in the universal gesture of men who believe their authority to stop things is self-evident. "Marshal Briggs," he called out, "I have a court order. Miss Donovan is to be remanded to Continental Railway custody pending a hearing in Denver on charges of—" "Mr. Voss," Briggs said, and his voice had 30 years of federal territory in it. "I don't recognize the jurisdiction of a private company's legal division over a federal witness. Get out of the road." "The order is signed by Judge—" "Get out of the road," Briggs said again. Voss's horse shifted under him. He was not a natural rider. "Marshal, you're making a significant error. Victor Langford has—" "Victor Langford," Martha said loud and clear from the middle of the group, "has the names of 4 federal officials in my ledger, 3 incidents of documented land fraud, and approximately 48 hours before that information runs in the Copperfield Sentinel, and every major paper it's connected to in Denver and Salt Lake City." She paused. "You can tell him I said that." Voss looked at her. The practiced authority in his expression flickered just slightly, just for a second, the way a lamp flickers when the wind finds it. "Miss Donovan," he started. "We're done talking," she said. Briggs moved his horse forward. His deputies moved with him. Caleb moved with them, and the formation didn't stop, and Voss's riders faced with 7 federal deputies and a very large and completely calm cowboy, who was looking at them with the specific expression of a man who has genuinely nothing to lose, pulled to the side of the road. Voss said something as they passed. Caleb didn't catch all of it, but he caught, "This isn't finished," and "consequences," and Langford. Martha, riding directly past Voss's horse, said nothing. She looked straight ahead. But her jaw was set, and her eyes were bright, and Caleb thought in the private, unspoken part of himself, where he kept observations he didn't know what to do with, yet that she was one of the most fearless people he had ever ridden alongside. Paul Greer was exactly what Caleb had expected, small, wiry, with ink-stained hands, and the kind of eyes that were always reading something, even when there was nothing in front of them. He met them at the back entrance of the Sentinel's building, because Briggs had sent a rider ahead, and he took one look at Martha and said, "You're Donovan, tell me everything." "I'll show you better than I'll tell you," Martha said, and opened the satchel. The next 3 hours in Paul Greer's office were the most concentrated 3 hours Caleb had sat through since the war. Martha laid out the documentation with the precision of someone presenting a legal argument, which he understood now was exactly what it was. She walked Greer through the ledger column by column, explaining what each entry meant, what the real transaction behind the recorded fiction had been, whose name appeared, and what that name's appearance indicated. Greer asked questions like a man who had been waiting 2 years for exactly this conversation. Sharp questions. Questions that pushed into corners Martha hadn't lit up yet and made her stop and think, and occasionally revise a statement to be more precisely accurate. Caleb watched her respect for the man build in real time. He himself said almost nothing during those 3 hours. He sat near the door. He watched the window. He listened. Somewhere in the second hour, Greer said, "This will destroy him. If we can verify even half of this destroys Langford completely." "It's all verifiable," Martha said. "I didn't copy anything I couldn't source." The federal officials named, 3 of them are currently in office, she said. 1 retired last year. The payments continued after retirement, which actually makes the documentation cleaner. Greer looked up from the ledger. "You understand that once this runs, there will be legal challenges. Langford's lawyers will claim the documents are fabricated." "They're welcome to claim that in front of the original ledgers," Martha said, "which I did not bring here, and which are in a location I haven't told anyone." Greer looked at her. Then he looked at Caleb. "She's been planning this for a while. Longer than I've known her," Caleb said. "Which isn't long." "Long enough," Martha said. She didn't look at Caleb when she said it, but something in her voice changed slightly on the words. Just slightly. Greer set down his pen. "I can have a preliminary piece in print by Thursday," he said. "Denver connection by Friday if the Telegraph cooperates." "The Telegraph may not cooperate," Martha said. "Langford has people at the Copperfield station." Greer smiled for the first time. It was a very specific kind of smile. The smile of a man who had been in a particular fight for a long time and had planned for exactly this obstacle. "I have a courier who rides to Denver personally," he said. "Young man, fast horse, no telegraph involved." Martha looked at him. "You were ready for this." "I've been ready for this for 2 years, Greer said. "I just needed someone to walk through the door with the numbers." The meeting ended. Greer had legitimate copies made in his presence, witnessed by Briggs himself. The original ledger was back in the satchel. Martha stood in the back alley behind the Sentinel building in the early evening heat, and the reality of the last 24 hours seemed to settle on her all at once. Not breaking Martha Donovan didn't break, but landing. Briggs came to stand beside her. "I want you in protective custody until this runs," he said. "It's not optional. Voss had 4 riders on that road. Langford knows you're in Copperfield." "I know," she said. "My office in Laramie is the safest place I can put you," he said. She nodded. Then she looked at Caleb. He was standing apart from the marshal's party, the way he'd stood apart from things his whole life, not excluded, just positioned at his own angle, watching everything with that flat, steady attention that she'd stopped finding unsettling sometime around the middle of last night. "Mr. Walker," she said. "Caleb," he said. She looked at him. "Caleb?" And something about the way she said his name direct clear without the formality she'd worn like armor for the entire time she'd known him, made something shift in the quiet part of his chest that he'd stopped paying attention to a long time ago. "You should go back to your ranch." "Probably," he said. "You've done more than—" "Don't finish that sentence," he said. She stopped. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "And I didn't do any of it because I was keeping score." He looked at her steadily. "Go to Laramie. Stay with Briggs. Let the paper run." "And then," she said. "And then we see what the numbers do," he said. She held his gaze for a moment. In the last light of the day, with the heat still sitting heavy on everything, and the sound of Copperfield going about its evening business on the other side of the building, she looked at him the way a person looks at something they're going to remember. "I'll come back," she said. "When this is done, I'll come back and tell you how it ends." He looked at her. "You don't have to." "I know," she said. "I'll come back anyway." He didn't argue with her. He'd already learned that arguing with Martha Donovan about something she'd decided was a losing proposition, and he'd known her less than 30 hours. He touched the brim of his hat. She watched him do it. Then he turned and walked back to where his horse was waiting, and he didn't look back, and she watched him go, with an expression that nobody else in the alley was close enough to see. Marshal Briggs appeared at her shoulder. "Ready," he said. She picked up the satchel and settled the strap across her shoulder. "Yes," she said. "Let's go." The ride to Laramie took the rest of the day and most of the evening. Martha didn't sleep in the saddle the way some of Briggs's deputies did, the easy practiced slump of people who'd learned to rest while moving. She stayed upright the entire ride, watching the road, watching the ridgelines, doing the mental arithmetic that had kept her alive for the past 6 weeks. Cataloging. Calculating. Running the same numbers she'd been running since the moment she'd walked out of the Continental Railway's accounting office, with a hand-copied ledger pressed against her ribs, and the full understanding that she had just made herself a target. She thought about Caleb Walker, the way she thought about most things, not with sentiment, but with precision. He had made a series of choices in the past 24 hours that had cost him something real. His privacy, his neutrality, possibly his safety. And he had made every one of those choices without theatrics, without expectation, and without ever once making her feel that she owed him anything for it. That was rarer than most people understood. She filed it away and kept writing. Laramie at night was a different animal from Laramie in daylight. Briggs brought them in through the back streets, avoiding the main thoroughfare, and installed Martha in a room above his office that had one window, one door, and a deputy stationed outside both. He told her to sleep. She didn't sleep. She sat at the small table with the satchel open and went through the ledger one more time. Not because she'd missed anything she hadn't, but because the act of reading the numbers grounded her, reminded her what this was about. 47 families displaced from their land without compensation. 3 men dead who'd refused to sign transfer documents under duress. 4 federal officials who'd taken payment to look away. 1 man at the center of it who had operated for 6 years on the assumption that nobody with both the evidence and the nerve would ever be in the same room. She was in the room. She had the evidence. The nerve she'd built herself one night at a time, hunched over a desk in her apartment, copying numbers by lamplight while the rest of the city slept. She closed the ledger at 2 in the morning and sat in the dark and thought about what came next. What came next arrived faster than she expected. Briggs knocked on her door at 6:30. She was already dressed. He looked at her with the particular expression of a man who had information he hadn't yet decided how to deliver. "Sit down," she said. "I haven't said anything yet," he said. "You have the face of someone about to say something difficult," she said. "Sit down." He sat. She waited. "I got a telegraph from my supervisor in Cheyenne this morning," he said. "He's ordering me to release you to Continental Railway custody pending the Denver hearing." Martha was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. "Your supervisor," she said. "The one who told you to stay out of anything connected to the Continental expansion." "Yes," Briggs said. "He's in the ledger," she said. Deputy Territorial Commissioner Raymond Holt. Page 31. 3 payments, 18 months, totaling $420. Briggs stared at her. "You're certain?" "I am always certain," she said. "What are you going to do?" He was quiet for a long moment. The kind of quiet that meant a man was making a decision that would follow him for the rest of his life. "I'm going to tell my supervisor that I received his telegraph and that I'm processing it through proper federal channels," he said. "Which technically I am." "How long does that buy us?" she said. 2 days, he said. "Maybe 3. After that, if I haven't transferred you, he'll send someone who will." "The paper runs Thursday," she said. "Greer told me Thursday." "It's Tuesday morning," Briggs said. She did the math instantly. 48 hours. "Give or take," he said. She stood up. She picked up the satchel. "Then we need to make 48 hours count," she said. "I want to send a telegraph to the federal prosecutor's office in Washington." Briggs looked at her. "How do you know about the federal prosecutor's office?" "I spent 6 years processing legal filings for a major railway corporation," she said. "I know every office that exists between a crime and a consequence." He almost smiled. "Not quite." "The telegraph office here isn't safe," he said. "Langford's got a man on the line. I know, she said. Can you send it through your federal relay? The one that doesn't go through the commercial line. He studied her. You know about that too. Is there a thing you know about this territory that you're surprised I know? She said. This time he did smile. It was brief and genuine. I'll send it, he said. What do you want it to say? She told him. 40 minutes later, a federal telegraph was moving through the secure territorial relay toward Washington, carrying Martha Donovan's name, the summary of her documentation, and a specific request for federal prosecutorial oversight that would, if received and acted on, effectively remove the case from any territorial jurisdiction that Langford's money could reach. It was the right move. She knew it was the right move. What she didn't know, what she had no way of knowing yet, was that Langford had a man in the federal relay too. That information arrived in the form of Harlan Voss. He came to the marshal's office at 9 o'clock in the morning. Not with Pinkerton agents this time, but with a lawyer. A different lawyer, someone from Denver. Someone whose suit cost more than most men in Laramie made in a year. He had papers. Federal papers. He laid them on Briggs's desk with the specific confidence of a man who has paid for what he's about to do. Martha was in the room. Briggs had let her stay because she'd asked and because he'd already made the private decision that Martha Donovan's judgment was as reliable as most federal officials he'd worked with and more reliable than some. A federal preservation order, Voss said. Signed this morning. It requires that all documentation claimed to be in Miss Donovan's possession be surrendered immediately to the custody of the Continental Railway Corporation's legal division, pending authentication. Martha looked at the papers. Then she looked at Voss. A preservation order, she said. You're asking me to hand the evidence of a crime to the people who committed it so they can authenticate it. The order is legally valid, Voss said. The judge who signed it, she said. Is his name Aldrich? Voss's face didn't move. That was its own answer. Theodore Aldrich, she said. Page 44 of my ledger. 2 payments. The second one was made 8 weeks ago. She looked at Briggs. He signed this order 8 weeks after accepting a bribe. Voss said, Miss Donovan, this isn't... Mr. Voss, Briggs said, standing up. I'm going to need to verify the authenticity of that order through my Federal Circuit contact before I act on it. That process takes approximately 48 hours. The order specifies immediate. The order specifies what my supervisor would like to happen, Briggs said. My job specifies what the law requires. Those are sometimes different things. He looked at Voss with the expression of a man who has made peace with difficult situations and found a very specific kind of freedom in it. 48 hours. You're welcome to wait. Voss gathered his papers. He looked at Martha with the expression of a man who has more moves and knows it. Victor Langford asked me to give you a message, Miss Donovan. She waited. He said he understands why you did what you did, Voss said, and he has a great deal of respect for your intelligence. He said, and I'm quoting, that there is still a version of this where everyone walks away from it better off than they found it. Martha looked at him steadily. Tell Mr. Langford that I've seen his version of better off, she said. I have the names of 47 families who used to own land that his better off required them to give up. I have the names of 3 men who died because they said no to his version of better off. She paused. Tell him that message is the last communication I'm willing to receive from him. Voss left. When the door closed, Briggs sat back down and rubbed his face with both hands in the manner of a man who was absolutely certain he was doing the right thing and absolutely uncertain about what it was going to cost him. He's going to go above my head, Briggs said. He already did, Martha said. Commissioner Holt's telegraph this morning was Langford's move, not Holt's. Holt doesn't have the initiative for it. She sat down across from him. He's running out of legal options. When a man like Langford runs out of legal options, he stops using legal ones, Briggs said. Yes, she said. How many deputies do you have in this building right now? 4, he said. Is that enough? He was quiet for a moment. Probably not, he said. She put her hand on the satchel. Get more, she said. She was right to say it. She was right in the way she was always right about threats, not from intuition exactly, but from the same systematic reading of information that she applied to everything. Langford's pattern, as she understood it from 6 years of processing his corporate documents, was to exhaust legal options first, then apply pressure to the people applying the legal options. And when both of those failed to create a crisis that required an immediate decision, under conditions where careful thinking was impossible, he was going to create a crisis. She just didn't know yet what form it would take. The form it took was Hector Reyes. Briggs's deputy came upstairs at 10:30 with the look of a man carrying bad news and trying to figure out how to set it down without breaking anything. He said, "Marshal, there's a man downstairs, says his name is Reyes, says he rode from Walker's ranch." Martha was on her feet before the deputy finished the sentence. She was downstairs in 45 seconds. Hector Reyes looked like a man who had ridden hard for the second time in 2 days and had not slept between the 2 rides. He was sitting in a chair in Briggs's outer office with a cup of water he wasn't drinking, and when Martha came through the door, he looked at her with an expression that told her everything before he said a word. "Caleb," she said. "He's alive," Hector said immediately. "I want you to know that first. He's alive." She sat down across from him. Her hands were steady. She made them be steady. "Tell me." 6 men came to the ranch last night, Hector said. "Not Pinkertons. Private. No badges, no identification. They came in after midnight and they—" He stopped, collected himself. "They burned the barn." She was quiet. "Caleb got out," Hector said. "He was in the house when they came. He got out and he—" Hector paused. "He's not a man who runs Miss Donovan. You understand that. He went back." "He went back," she said. "Tried to stop them, alone." Hector set down the cup. "They beat him pretty bad and left him in the yard. One of my boys found him at first light." He looked at her directly. "His ranch hand boy named Eddie said they were asking for you. Asking where you'd gone. Asking what Caleb had told you." The quiet that followed that statement was not the quiet of a woman who didn't feel anything. It was the quiet of a woman who felt everything and had learned through difficult practice to hold it still long enough to think. "Did he tell them anything?" she said. Hector looked at her like the question was slightly beside the point. "Caleb Walker," he said, "would not tell those men the color of the sky." She exhaled, slowly. "Where is he now?" "My place," Hector said. "My wife's a fair hand at patching people up. He's banged up, but he'll be whole." He paused. "He told me to come tell you. He said—" Hector reached into his coat pocket and produced a folded piece of paper. He wrote it down. Said he didn't trust himself to remember it exactly right, and he wanted it exact. She took the paper, unfolded it. Caleb's handwriting, large, angular, nothing like hers. It said, "The copies in my boot are safe. Don't come back for me. Finish it." She read it twice. Then she folded it and put it in her pocket. "Is he asking you to go back?" Briggs said from behind her. She hadn't heard him come down. "He's telling me not to," she said. "Which is different." She looked at Hector. "How bad are his injuries?" "Broken ribs," Hector said. "Cut above his eye. They hit him with something, maybe a rifle stock. He kept saying it didn't matter, which is what a man says when it does matter, but he's too proud to say so." Martha pressed her lips together. Then she looked at Briggs. "I need you to send 2 deputies to the Reyes Ranch," she said. "Now, today." "Miss Donovan, they burned his barn and beat him because of me," she said. Her voice was level, completely level. "He is a witness to a criminal attack by men working for Victor Langford. He deserves federal protection, and I need to know he has it before I can think about anything else." Briggs looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at Hector. Then he turned to the deputy by the door. "Take Jenkins and ride out to the Reyes property. You're providing protective detail. You don't leave until I say." The deputy left. Martha turned back to Hector. "Tell him," she started. Stopped. Started again. "Tell him the copies are not the issue. Tell him I know they're safe. And tell him—" She paused, and for just a moment, just one unguarded second, something crossed her face that she hadn't let show since she'd first walked into Caleb Walker's kitchen and asked for water. "Tell him I heard him," she said. "Tell him I'm finishing it." Hector nodded. He stood up and he looked at her the way a man looks at someone he's decided is worth the second hard ride in 2 days. "He said one more thing," Hector said. "When I was leaving. He said, and this is exact because I asked him twice, he said, 'Tell her the barn's already gone. The only thing worth protecting now is what she's carrying.'" Martha didn't say anything. She looked at the satchel in her hand. Then she said, "Thank you, Mr. Reyes. Ride safe." He left. She stood in the middle of Briggs's outer office with the satchel and the ledger and 48 hours and the specific understanding that Langford had just made the mistake she'd been waiting for him to make. He'd gone after Caleb. He'd attacked a private citizen, a rancher with no federal connection, a man whose only crime was refusing to hand a woman over to men with a rope. He'd done it with unnamed men to avoid the Pinkerton paper trail, which meant it was extra legal even by the loose standards of what he'd done before. And Hector Reyes had ridden through the night and seen it. And Briggs's deputy had just been sent to document it. "That's a federal assault charge," she said to no one in particular. "On a witness?" Briggs said from behind her. He'd been thinking the same thing. Attack on a federal witness carries mandatory prosecution. "Is Caleb a federal witness?" she said. "He is now," Briggs said. "The moment my deputies document that attack, he becomes material to the obstruction case." He paused. "Which is what Langford just handed us." She turned around. "He's panicking," she said. "Langford. He's making decisions fast instead of smart because the 48-hour window is real to him and he's trying to close it." She looked at Briggs. "Panicking men make more mistakes." "They also do more damage," Briggs said. "Yes," she said. "So we move faster than he does." She was already thinking, running the calculation of what they had, what they needed, what the next 40 hours required. The telegraph to Washington. "Has there been a response?" "Not yet," Briggs said. "Check again," she said. He went to check. She sat down and opened the ledger to page 44. Theodore Aldrich's page, and read it again, and then turned to Raymond Holt's page 31, and read that, and then turned to the pages she'd copied into Caleb's handwriting and put in his boot, and which were now, according to Hector Reyes, still safe at the Reyes ranch. She thought about Caleb sitting in the Reyes kitchen with broken ribs and a cut above his eye, writing a note that said, "Finish it," in that angular handwriting. She thought about him going back into 6 men because he was not a man who ran. She thought, "I will finish it." And then she stopped thinking about it and focused on the numbers, because the numbers were what she had, and the numbers were what would end this. Briggs came back in 20 minutes with a telegraph form in his hand and an expression she hadn't seen on him before. "Washington responded," he said. She looked up. "And?" "They want the documentation," he said. "Not copies. Original ledger. A federal courier is being dispatched from Denver." He paused. "But there's more." "Tell me," she said. "The federal prosecutor's office is aware of Victor Langford," Briggs said. "They have been for 14 months. They had an investigation open." He stopped. "Had." She went very still. "Had?" she said. "It was closed," Briggs said. 6 months ago. Internal review determined there was insufficient evidence." He looked at her steadily. "The review was conducted by a committee that included Raymond Holt," she said, "and Theodore Aldrich," he said. The full shape of it landed on her all at once, not as a surprise, because nothing about what Langford was capable of had surprised her since she'd first understood the scope of the ledger, but as a confirmation, as the complete picture finally assembled from all its parts. "They shut it down," she said. "They were inside it from the beginning. The investigation, the evidence, the prosecutors, he was ahead of all of it." "Until you," Briggs said. She looked at him. "Until you," he said again. "Because you didn't go through any of the channels he'd already bought. You copied it by hand, you carried it yourself, and you walked into a ranch in Wyoming that wasn't on any list that Langford's people were watching." She thought about the woman in Cheyenne who'd told her about the ranch up the North Ridge Road, the woman whose name she had never asked because it was safer not to know. She thought about a broken barn latch. She thought about a man who'd said, "Haven't seen anybody" to 4 agents and then walked calmly to a barn. "The Federal Courier from Denver," she said. "Can they be trusted?" "I don't know," Briggs said. "That's the honest answer." "Then we don't wait for the courier," she said. "We take it there ourselves." Briggs stared at her. "Denver is 3 days' ride. 2.5 if we move now," she said. "And the Sentinel runs Thursday. If the story is already public when we arrive in Denver with the original documentation, Langford can't suppress it legally or otherwise. The verification process becomes a formality." "Martha," Briggs said. And it was the first time he'd used her first name. It came out of the situation rather than intention, she could tell. "If Langford knows you're moving toward Denver, he already knows I'm in Laramie," she said. "He knows I sent a telegraph to Washington. He knows he has 48 hours. She looked at the satchel. "He's going to come for this regardless of where I am. The question is whether we're moving when he does or sitting still." Briggs was quiet. The specific quiet of a man who had come out of 30 years in this territory, knowing that moving was almost always better than sitting still, but who was old enough to know that almost always wasn't always. "I need a rider," he said finally, "to go ahead of us, clear the road." "Hector Reyes is probably back at his ranch by now," she said. "He already knows the route." "I'm not sending a 62-year-old man on a third hard ride in 3 days," Briggs said. "Then send someone who can keep up with him," she said. "Because Hector Reyes already knows what this is about, and he'll ride anyway if you ask him." Briggs looked at her. "You trust him?" "I trust people who've already proven themselves," she said. "It's the only kind of trust that means anything." He left to make arrangements. She sat alone with the ledger and the weight of what the next 48 hours would require. The federal investigation shut down from inside. The judges bought. The commissioners paid. The telegraph lines compromised. Everything she'd thought was a safety net had a hole in it. Everything she'd trusted to be independent wasn't. Everything except Greer's printing press and Caleb Walker's handwriting in her boot. She put her hand on the satchel. She thought about Caleb's note. The only thing worth protecting now is what she's carrying. She thought, he's right. And I know exactly what to do with it. She was still sitting there, still thinking, when the window above her shattered inward. Not a gunshot. A rock. A rock with a piece of paper tied to it, which was the oldest and crudest form of message delivery. And also, she understood immediately, a deliberate choice. Something that couldn't be traced, couldn't be sourced, couldn't be entered as evidence. The paper said 3 words, "Give it up." She looked at the 3 words for a long moment. Then she set the paper down on Briggs's desk, stood up, picked up the satchel, and walked to the door. When Briggs came back in from the yard, having heard the window break and arrived at a run, she was standing at the door with the satchel over her shoulder, and the expression of a woman who had been threatened enough times that it had stopped producing fear and started producing something harder and more useful. "We leave in an hour," she said. "Martha." "1 hour," she said. "Get your horses ready, get your deputies ready, and get word to Hector Reyes." She paused. "Tell him we're riding to Denver and ask him if he wants to come." Briggs looked at the broken window. He looked at the rock. He looked at the piece of paper on his desk with its 3 words. Then he looked at her. "You know he'll say yes," he said. "I know," she said. "That's why I'm asking." She walked back upstairs to gather the last of what she'd need, and she didn't look at the broken window, and she didn't look at the 3 words, and she held the satchel against her side with the same grip she'd used when she'd first pressed a hand-copied ledger against her ribs, and walked out of the Continental Railway's accounting office into a life that had required every version of herself she'd ever been. She had one more version left to be. She intended to make it count. Hector Reyes said yes before Briggs finished asking. He said it the way a man says yes to something he's been waiting to say yes to for a long time. Not impulsively, not carelessly, but with the settled weight of a decision that had already been made somewhere deeper than the moment it was spoken. He arrived at the marshal's office 40 minutes after the messenger reached him on a fresh horse with a rifle across his saddle and a look on his face that said he understood exactly what this ride meant and had made his peace with it before he left his front door. Martha was outside when he rode up. She looked at him and said, "You didn't have to come." "No," Hector said. "I didn't." He looked at the satchel. "Is it all in there?" "Everything that matters," she said. He nodded once. "Then let's ride." They left Laramie with 6 people. Briggs, 3 deputies, Martha and Hector, and the specific understanding that what they were doing had stopped being a legal matter and become something more personal. Langford had made it personal when he'd sent 6 men to a ranch at midnight with instructions that didn't include leaving witnesses. He'd made it personal when Caleb Walker had been left in a yard with broken ribs and a cut above his eye, because he'd refused to say where she'd gone. Martha rode and didn't talk for the first hour. She was doing what she always did under pressure sorting, running through everything she knew, everything she documented, everything that could still go wrong between Laramie and Denver and the federal prosecutor's desk. The list of things that could go wrong was not short. The road to Denver ran through 3 counties, and she knew from the ledger that Langford had relationships, financial relationships, the kind that produced loyalty of a very specific and mercenary variety in at least 2 of them. The telegraph lines along the route were commercial lines, which meant compromised lines. And Voss was still out there somewhere with his court orders and his Denver lawyer, and the specific patience of a man who knew he had more resources than the people he was chasing. But the Sentinel ran Thursday, and it was Tuesday afternoon. She held on to that the way she'd held on to the ledger through 6 weeks of running as the fixed point that everything else had to be oriented around. Briggs pulled alongside her around the 2nd hour. "You're thinking," he said. "Always," she said. "Thinking about what?" he said. "The secondary copies," she said. "The pages in Caleb's handwriting that are still at Hector's ranch." She glanced at Hector riding a few lengths ahead. "Those pages need to move. If something happens to this..." She touched the satchel. "Those pages are the only backup." "I sent a deputy to secure them this morning," Briggs said. She looked at him. When you were upstairs packing," he said, "I sent Jenkins back to the Reyes property with instructions to take the pages and ride them to Greer in Copperfield directly, not through Laramie, not through any telegraph station." He paused. "Jenkins is 23 years old, and he doesn't know anyone in this territory well enough to be bought." She looked at him for a long moment. "You thought of that before I did," she said. "You've been a little busy," he said. Something shifted in her the specific, unfamiliar sensation of not being the only person in the room carrying the weight of the plan. She didn't know what to do with it exactly. It had been so long since she'd had anyone to share the weight with that the sharing itself felt strange, like a muscle being used after a long disuse. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet," he said. And then, almost immediately, he caught himself, because those were the same words Caleb had said to her 2 days ago in the barn, and he could see from the slight change in her expression that she'd caught it too. Neither of them said anything about it. They rode. The first trouble came at a river crossing 40 miles south of Laramie. A man was waiting on the near bank alone, which was either brave or a distraction, and in Caleb's absence, Martha had appointed herself the person who calculated that kind of thing. She made the determination before they reached him distraction. One man alone on an open crossing in the middle of a federal escort was not an ambush. He was a message. Briggs pulled up his horse. The man raised both hands, the gesture of someone who wanted to demonstrate they weren't drawing a weapon which was itself information. "Marshal Briggs," the man said. He was young, maybe 30, well-dressed in a way that spoke of city money rather than territory money. "My name is Thomas Avery. I'm an attorney representing Victor Langford." He looked at Martha. "Miss Donovan, Mr. Langford would like to make a final offer." "There is no offer," Martha said. "Please hear it," Avery said. He was not Voss. He didn't have Voss's practiced aggression. He had the look of someone who'd been sent on this errand against his better judgment, and knew it. Mr. Langford is prepared to establish a land compensation fund of $200,000 for the families affected by the right-of-way acquisitions. He's prepared to accept the resignation of the 4 officials named in your documentation and to cooperate with an internal review. Martha stared at him. An internal review, she said. Conducted by the Continental Railway's own compliance office. Avery said. With independent oversight from... No, she said. Miss Donovan, $200,000 would... 3 men are dead, she said. You understand that 3 men died. A land compensation fund doesn't address that. An internal review doesn't address that. And oversight from a compliance office that Langford himself created doesn't address anything. She looked at Avery directly. He's not offering accountability. He's offering a transaction. And I stopped being interested in his transactions the first time his people tried to run me off a road. Avery was quiet for a moment. Something in his expression, the reluctant, conflicted expression of a man who had taken a case he was increasingly uncertain about, shifted. He won't stop, he said. It came out quieter than the rest of what he'd said, almost like he hadn't meant to say it aloud. I know, she said. Neither will I. She looked at Briggs. Briggs looked at Avery. You need to move off this crossing, Briggs said. Now. Avery moved. He rode back the way he'd come without another word, and Martha watched him go, and felt nothing about it except a clarified certainty Langford was down to personal offers delivered by reluctant attorneys on river crossings. He was running out of moves. The distraction question answered itself 20 minutes later when they came over a rise and found 4 riders blocking the road ahead. Not Pinkertons, not lawyers. Men who wore their profession the same way they wore their guns, plainly without pretense. Martha's hand went to the satchel. Reflex. Briggs didn't hesitate. He called out in the clear, carrying voice of 30 years of federal authority. You are obstructing a federal marshal's escort. Identify yourselves and clear the road, or you will be placed under arrest. The 4 riders didn't move. Briggs looked at his deputies. Something passed between them without words, the specific communication of people who have worked together long enough that the language of glances is sufficient. Miss Donovan, Briggs said, quiet just for her. Ride to the left. Stay behind me. Don't stop moving regardless of what you hear. I'm not leaving the group, she said. You're not leaving the group, he said. You're positioning. There's a difference. She moved left. Hector moved with her, and she noticed that he hadn't been asked. He'd just read the situation and adjusted the same way he'd adjusted to everything in the past 3 days without complaint or explanation. She thought briefly that Hector Reyes was the kind of man that difficult situations revealed, and what they revealed was someone worth knowing. The confrontation lasted 4 minutes and ended without gunfire. One of Briggs's deputies, the older one, the one who'd been watching everything quietly for 2 days, rode directly at the 4 men with a speed and directness that clearly communicated he was not going to stop, and 3 of the 4 scattered. The 4th held his ground 1 second too long and found himself flanked, and the expression on his face went from determined to recalculating in the time it took to understand that the calculus had shifted against him. He moved. Briggs didn't pursue. They kept riding. How much further? Martha said. Day and a half, Briggs said. If we don't stop long. We don't stop long, she said. They made camp that night in the kind of brief, functional way that people make camp when stopping is a necessity and not a preference. Martha sat at the edge of the fire and ate without tasting, and thought about Denver, about the prosecutor's office, about the specific federal official Briggs had said he trusted, about what the next conversation needed to accomplish, and how she needed to go into it. Hector sat across the fire from her. He looked at her steadily. You should sleep, he said. I should, she said. I won't. No, he said. I know. He was quiet for a moment. He's worried about you. She looked up. Caleb, Hector said. Before I left, when he was sitting in my kitchen with my wife wrapping his ribs, he told me to tell you not to come back. But what he was actually thinking about was you. He paused. He didn't say it in so many words. He's not a man who says things in words if he can avoid it. But I've known Caleb Walker for 9 years, and I know what he looks like when he's worried about something. Martha looked at the fire. He's been alone a long time, Hector said. By choice, not by accident. He paused again. What happened on his ranch in the last 2 days, that's the most he's let himself care about a situation in a long time. I just thought you should know that. Not to make it into something it isn't. Just so you know. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "How bad are his ribs?" "Bad enough that he shouldn't ride for 2 weeks, Hector said. "Which means he'll probably ride in 1. He needs to stay at your place," she said. "Safe, away from the ranch until this is done." "I told him that," Hector said. He said, "I know what he said," she said. "Yeah," Hector said. "I figured you might." She looked back at the fire. After a while she said, "Tell me about him. The 9 years you've known him." Hector looked at her a long look, the kind that was reading whether the question was what it seemed to be. Whatever he found satisfied him. "He came out here after the war," Hector said. "I don't know all of what the war did to him, and he's never said, and I've never asked. But I know what it looked like from the outside. A man who had decided that needing things from people was a liability. So he stopped needing things." He paused. "He built that ranch by himself. Every plank of that barn, the one they burned, he put up himself. Because he didn't want to ask for help." Martha closed her eyes for 1 second, then opened them. "He let me stay," she said. Quiet. Thinking out loud more than speaking to Hector. "Yes," Hector said. He did. She didn't say anything else. But something had shifted in her face, not softening. Still not softening because Martha Donovan didn't go soft in the middle of a fight. But something that had been held very tightly for a very long time had moved slightly like a door that had been shut for years and had just barely opened a crack. She slept 3 hours. It was more than she'd expected. They reached the outskirts of Denver the following afternoon, and the city announced itself the way cities always did when you came in from territory: louder, faster, more layers of noise and intention stacked on top of each other than any single person could track. Martha tracked it anyway. She was looking for what didn't fit. Looking for Langford's signature, the too still man at a corner, the rider who adjusted his pace to match theirs, the message boy who happened to be in exactly the wrong position. She found 2 of the 3. She told Briggs. He adjusted their route without discussion. The federal prosecutor's office was on the 2nd floor of a building that smelled like paperwork and institutional permanence. And the man behind the desk, Briggs's contact, a prosecutor named Walter Fenn, who had the look of someone who had been doing this job long enough to have stopped being surprised by anything and had become, in the absence of surprise, very precise, looked up when they came in and looked at the satchel. "Is that it?" Fenn said. "This is it," Martha said. She set the satchel on his desk. 4 months of documentation. Original hand-copied ledger from the Continental Railway Corporation's financial records. Land acquisition fraud, bribery of federal and territorial officials. Evidence connected to 3 deaths and 47 forced displacements. She paused. "And I'd like to be in the room while you read it." Fenn looked at Briggs. Briggs said, "I'd let her stay." Fenn looked at Martha. "Sit down," he said. She sat. She watched him read. She had watched a great many people encounter the numbers in that ledger for the first time: Greer's sharp journalist eyes, Briggs's measured assessment, Hector's quiet recognition. But watching Fenn read it was different. Fenn read the way a prosecutor reads, which was with the specific focused attention of someone who was simultaneously absorbing information and building a structure around it. She could almost see the case being assembled in real time behind his eyes. He read for 40 minutes without speaking. Then he set down the ledger and looked at her. "Raymond Holt," he said. "Page 31, she said. 3 payments. Theodore Aldrich. Page 44. 2 payments. The second was 8 weeks ago. James Carver." He named a federal official she recognized from the Washington level, a name she'd been careful about, A name she hadn't told Briggs or Greer because she hadn't known yet how far up the infection went. Page 52, she said. One payment, but it was large. $3,500. Fenn leaned back. Something had shifted in his expression, the specific shift of a man who had been given confirmation of something he'd suspected and had not had the evidence to pursue. You know him, she said. I know of him, Fenn said. He shut down the federal investigation 14 months ago. Not Holt. Carver. Holt was the mechanism. Carver was the decision. The weight of that settled in the room. How far does it go? Briggs said. He was standing near the door. He'd been standing near the door the whole time, the way he stood near doors, as if the exit was always worth keeping in sight. I don't know yet, Fenn said. But this... He looked at the ledger. This is the most complete documentation of systematic federal corruption I have seen in 22 years in this office. He looked at Martha. How did you copy all of this? Carefully, she said. And alone, and at night, for 4 months. He looked at her for a long moment. The Sentinel runs tomorrow, he said. It wasn't a question. Thursday, she confirmed. Greer has copies. The key pages also exist in a second location that I'll disclose once I have your formal protective order. You're negotiating, he said. I'm ensuring, she said. There's a difference. He almost smiled. Then he pulled a form from his desk drawer and began writing. I'm issuing a federal protective order for you and for the documentation effective immediately. I'm also issuing a federal warrant for Victor Langford on charges of bribery conspiracy to commit fraud and obstruction of federal investigation. He kept writing. Raymond Holt, Theodore Aldrich, and James Carver will each receive notice of investigation by end of day. She watched the pen move across the paper. And the displaced families, she said. The 47. He looked up. That's what this is about, she said. Not Langford. Not the officials, the people whose land was taken by fraud and whose names are in that ledger. She held his gaze. I want to know that documentation of their losses goes into this case formally. On record, not as a footnote. Fenn looked at her steadily. It goes in formally, he said. I give you my word. She nodded. He signed the protective order and slid it across the desk. She picked it up and read every line of it before she put it in her pocket, because Martha Donovan did not accept documents on trust alone, not even from federal prosecutors, not anymore. The second location of the copies, he said. You said you'd disclose it. Jenkins, she said. She looked at Briggs. Your deputy, 23 years old. He was carrying the secondary copies to Greer in Copperfield. Briggs pulled out and sent a deputy to find a telegraph station, a federal one, not a commercial one, and get word to Copperfield. Martha watched him go and felt the first genuine loosening of something that had been wound tight since the morning she'd walked out of the Continental Railway building. Not relief, not yet. Relief was for after, but something adjacent to it. Something that acknowledged for the first time that the weight she'd been carrying was in more than one pair of hands now, and that those hands were as far as she could determine trustworthy. She was standing in the hallway outside Fenn's office, looking at nothing when the deputy came back at a run. His face told her before he opened his mouth. Jenkins, he said to Briggs, breathing hard. He made it to Copperfield. He got the copies to Greer. He paused. But Greer's office, someone set fire to the front of the Sentinel building last night. The hallway went very still. Greer, Briggs said sharply. Is Greer? He's alive, the deputy said. He got out, but the press... He stopped. They destroyed the press. Martha stood very still. The Sentinel's press was gone. The Thursday edition wasn't running. Fenn had come out of his office. He was standing in the hallway with the rest of them, and he was looking at Martha, and his expression said that he understood exactly what this meant to the timeline. The copies Jenkins delivered, Martha said. Her voice was completely steady. Are they intact? Yes, the deputy said. Greer had them on him when he got out. He doesn't have a way to print them. Denver, Martha said immediately. She turned to Fen. Denver papers. Who in this city has been covering the railway expansion? Fen said, the Denver Tribune. Thomas Harker. Can you get Harker here in the next 2 hours? She said. Fen looked at her. Then he turned to his own deputy. Get Harker, he said. She sat back down in Fen's office. She opened the satchel. She laid out the pages that Greer had sent with Jenkins Caleb's handwriting, large and angular, perfectly accurate, beside the original ledger. She thought about Langford burning Greer's press. She thought about 6 men at a ranch at midnight. She thought about a rock through a window with 3 words on it. She thought about every move he'd made to stop this, and the specific, consistent, unchanging truth that none of them had worked. She thought about Caleb sitting in Hector's kitchen writing "Finish it" in large, angular handwriting. All right, she said to no one in particular. She straightened the pages on the desk. Harker arrived in 90 minutes. Thomas Harker was not what Martha expected. She'd expected a man like Greer, wiry, ink-stained, driven by the specific hunger of someone who'd been chasing a story for years. Harker was large, unhurried, with the kind of deliberate stillness that made rooms feel smaller when he walked into them. He sat down across from her without preamble, looked at the ledger on Fen's desk and said, "How long do I have to read it?" "As long as it takes you to understand it," Martha said. "And then you're going to print it." He looked at her. "The Tribune has editorial standards." "Good," she said. "So do I. That's why I copied 4 months of financial records by hand instead of making something up." She slid the first page toward him. "Start with page 31. Raymond Holt. Then go to page 44. Then 52. Read those 3 pages and tell me if your editorial standards have any remaining objections." Harker read. He read the way Fen read, with focused structural attention, but there was something additional in it. Something that was distinctly a journalist's reading, which was the simultaneous absorption of information and the translation of it into language that other people could understand. She watched his eyes move, and knew approximately 3 minutes into his reading that this was going to run. He set down the pages. He looked at her. 3 federal officials, he said. Named documented payment amounts, dates, she said, cross-referenced to the land acquisition events they authorized. The deaths, he said. 3 men, she said. Their names are on page 61. I included their land deed numbers and the dates of the transfer that occurred after each death. The pattern is self-explanatory. Harker was quiet for a moment. Victor Langford burned a printing press last night, he said. Paul Greer's press in Copperfield. Yes, she said. You know what that tells me, Harker said. It tells you he's afraid, she said. Which is the only thing about Victor Langford I've found genuinely satisfying in this entire situation. Harker looked at her for one more long moment. Then he stood up. I need 4 hours, he said. I'll have a compositor meet me at the Tribune in 30 minutes. We run a morning edition. He picked up the copies, Jenkins' copies, Caleb's handwriting, and looked at them. These are not in your hand, he said. No, she said. They're in the hand of a rancher in Wyoming who was beaten by Langford's men 2 days ago for not telling them where I'd gone. She held Harker's gaze. His name is Caleb Walker. When you write this story, I want that in it. What was done to him? His name. Exactly what happened. Harker looked at her steadily. Is he a source? He's a witness, she said. And he's the reason any of this got this far. She paused. His name goes in the story. Harker nodded once. He gathered the copies, tucked them under his arm, and walked out of Fenn's office without looking back. Martha listened to his footsteps going down the hallway, and then going down the stairs, and she sat in the specific quiet of a woman who had just handed the last piece of a 4-month plan to the last person who needed to hold it. Fenn was still in the room. He was watching her. It's done, he said. The hard part. The hard part was 4 months ago, she said. This was just the delivery. He almost smiled again. She was starting to understand that almost smiling was Fenn's version of genuine warmth. The warrants go out tonight, he said. Langford will know by morning. The Tribune runs by morning. He paused. Those two things happening simultaneously, that's what you planned, isn't it? The legal process and the public record at the same time. So he can't suppress one without the other being already in circulation. It's what I hoped for, she said. Planning requires more certainty than I had access to. You had enough certainty, he said. She looked at the satchel. The ledger was still inside it. It had been inside it for 6 weeks, pressed against her side through stagecoaches and barn lofts and marshals' offices and river crossings, and she had not once let go of it for longer than the time it took to hand it to someone she'd decided to trust. She put her hand on it. Then she took her hand off it. Keep it, she said. The original. It belongs in federal custody now. Fenn reached across the desk and took the satchel with both hands, which was the right way to receive something that had cost what that had cost. He didn't make a production of it. He just took it and set it beside his chair with the care of a man who understood what he was holding. What will you do now? He said. She thought about that. It was a question she hadn't let herself ask for 6 weeks, because the asking of it required the belief that there would be a now after the now she was in, and belief of that kind had felt dangerously close to hope, and hope had felt like a distraction from the work. I'll wait for the morning edition, she said, and then I'll go back. Briggs drove them to a hotel, a real one. Not a room above an office, and Martha sat on the edge of a bed for the first time since Cheyenne, and looked at her hands. They were steady. They had been steady for 6 weeks. She thought that was probably over now, the steadiness, or at least that it would take a different form, less the steadiness of a person bracing against something, and more the steadiness of a person who had stopped bracing and was figuring out what their natural posture was without the weight. She didn't sleep much. She hadn't expected to. At 6 a.m, Briggs knocked on her door. He was holding a newspaper. The Denver Tribune, morning edition, above the fold. The headline read, Continental Railway Fraud, Federal Officials Named in Land Seizure Conspiracy. Below the headline in smaller text, documentation, compiled by former railway accountant Martha Donovan, implicates Victor Langford and 3 federal officials in systematic land fraud, bribery, and deaths of Wyoming landowners. She read the first paragraph, standing in the doorway in the early morning light. And then she read the second paragraph, and then she found Caleb's name, right where she'd asked for it. 4th paragraph, clear and plain. Caleb Walker. A rancher in Wyoming's mountain territory was attacked at his property by men believed to be working under Langford's direction after providing shelter to Donovan during her flight from Pinkerton agents. Walker sustained serious injuries, and his property was damaged. He has been identified as a material witness in the federal investigation. She read his name twice. Then she handed the paper back to Briggs. It ran, she said. It ran, he said. Salt Lake City gets it by Thursday. The wire services are already picking it up. He paused. Fenn's office arrested Raymond Holt this morning at 5 o'clock. Aldrich is expected to surrender by noon. Carver. He stopped. She looked at him. Carver. Carver was found this morning attempting to board a train to Canada, Briggs said. He's in federal custody. She exhaled. Slow and complete. And Langford. Federal marshals arrived at his Denver office at 6 this morning, Briggs said. He was there. He didn't resist. He looked at her steadily. He knew. He saw the paper, and he knew it was over, and he didn't run. Of course he didn't, she said. Running is for people who don't have lawyers. She paused. How long before he's out on bond? Maybe a week, Briggs said honestly. Maybe less. He has very good lawyers. And the case, she said, will take months, he said. I told you that from the beginning. Yes, she said. But the paper ran. The names are public. The evidence is in federal custody. He can bond out, and he can hire lawyers, and he can challenge every document in that ledger, but he cannot put the story back in the press, and he cannot make the names disappear, and he cannot operate in this territory the way he has been operating. She met Briggs's eyes. That's not all of it, but it's enough to build from. Briggs looked at her for a long moment. Are you all right? He said. The question surprised her. Not because it was unexpected, but because nobody had asked it since this started. Not once. She'd been asked about the ledger and the evidence and the timeline and the plan and the documentation, but not once in 6 weeks had anyone looked at her and asked if she was all right. "I'll let you know," she said, "when I figure it out." He nodded. He handed her the newspaper. She folded it and put it in her coat pocket. Then she said, "I need to get back to Wyoming." Hector Reyes didn't argue with her about it. He'd been ready to ride since before she'd come downstairs that morning, which told her he'd known this was coming before she'd said it. He was standing at the horses with the look of a man who had accomplished what he'd come to do and was oriented toward home. "My wife is going to have a great deal of opinions about all of this," he said as they mounted up. "Is she right about things generally?" Martha said. "Almost always," he said. "It's her most irritating quality." She laughed. It came out of her unexpectedly genuine, unguarded, the laugh of someone who hadn't laughed in long enough that her own body surprised her with it. Hector looked at her with something warm in his expression. She composed herself, and they rode. Briggs escorted them as far as the territorial line. When he pulled up his horse to turn back, he looked at Martha with the expression of a man who was trying to find the right words and had settled on direct ones. "You did something remarkable," he said. "I want you to know that I understand exactly what it cost." She thought about the 6 weeks, the apartment and the lamplight, and the hand cramps from 4 months of copying. The stage driver who'd thrown her bags in the dust, the Pinkerton agents with the rope coiled on the saddle, the barn, Caleb's kitchen, the loft window, and the rifle she couldn't shoot well, the rock through the window with 3 words on it. "The 47 families," she said. "When the federal case builds, when there's a compensation process, make sure someone is tracking it. Make sure it doesn't get lost in the legal machinery." "I'll track it myself," he said. "Thank you, Marshal," she said. She meant it without qualification. He touched his hat brim. She nodded. He turned his horse and rode back toward Denver, and she and Hector turned north toward Wyoming. The ride back took 2 days. Martha spent most of it in the quiet she'd earned, not the tense calculating quiet of someone planning, but the different, deeper quiet of someone who had finished the plan and was learning what it felt like to simply be in motion without a specific destination driving them. She watched the territory go by and let it be what it was. She didn't read anything into the ridgelines. She didn't calculate the road. She thought about what came after. She was good with numbers. She had spent 6 years doing skilled and important work for an organization that had used her skills for criminal purposes. She had 4 months of demonstrated evidence that her abilities were exceptional. She had, as of this morning, her name in a Denver newspaper above a story that every federal official in this territory was going to read. That was a particular kind of credential. She thought about the 47 families and their displaced land claims and the compensation process that Fenn would be administering. Someone was going to have to do the financial documentation for that process, the verification of the original deeds, the calculation of appropriate compensation values, the accounting of what had been taken and what would need to be returned. Someone who was very good with numbers. She let that thought settle and didn't force it further. She thought about Caleb Walker. She let herself do that fully for the first time, without the discipline of setting it aside in favor of the next urgent thing. She thought about him the way she thought about things she wanted to understand clearly, directly, without sentimentality, with the honest attention she gave to anything that mattered. He had sheltered her without being asked. He had lied to federal agents without hesitation. He had ridden 12 miles at her side when he could have gone home. He had copied her numbers into his large, angular handwriting and put them in his boot, and then refused to give them up when 6 men had come to his ranch at midnight to take them. He had written "finish it" and sent Hector to deliver the message rather than coming himself, because he had understood that his coming would have been about him, and what she needed was to finish it. He had never once made her feel that what she was carrying was a problem. He had never once looked at her the way most men looked at her. The assessment, the discount, the recalculation of what her body meant about what her mind could do. He had looked at her like she was exactly what she was, and he had treated her accordingly, and she understood now that this was the rarest thing she had encountered in 30 years of being Martha Donovan in a world that had very specific ideas about what Martha Donovan should be. She was still thinking about it when Hector's ranch came into view. He was on the porch. Not because he'd seen them coming, though he had probably because Caleb Walker noticed things, but because he was sitting in the way of a man who had decided he was done staying in bed and had compromised by relocating to a chair. He had the look of someone whose ribs had strong opinions about everything he'd done in the past 2 days, and who was ignoring those opinions with practiced stubbornness. There was a bandage above his left eye. He was holding a cup of something with both hands and watching them ride up with the flat, steady attention she had been looking at for 4 days, and had apparently somewhere between Laramie and Denver, and back again started looking forward to. She dismounted. She walked toward the porch. He watched her come. "It ran," she said. "Hector's wife read it to me this morning," he said. "Denver Tribune, above the fold. Langford's in federal custody," she said. "The 3 officials are arrested or surrendered. The evidence is in federal hands with a prosecutor I believe in." She paused. "It's not finished. It'll take months, maybe longer, but it started properly and it won't be stopped." He nodded. A single complete nod. "Your name is in the article," she said. "4th paragraph. I asked the reporter to put it there." Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise, she wasn't sure Caleb Walker did surprise exactly. Something more like a man who had been handed something he hadn't known to expect and was processing whether he knew what to do with it. "Why?" he said. "Because what happened to you is part of the story," she said. "Because you're a federal witness now, which means there's a record that protects you going forward. And because—" She stopped, started again. "Because it was true, and I don't leave true things out of the record." He looked at her for a long moment. "How are your ribs?" she said. "Fine," he said. "Hector said broken," she said. "Hector worries," he said. "Hector is correct," she said. "How are your ribs?" He was quiet for a moment. "Broken," he said, "but functional." "Broken isn't functional," she said. "It is, if you're careful," he said. She sat down on the step below his chair. Not because she was tired, though she was, but because sitting down felt like the right thing to do. Like the conversation they were about to have was one that deserved to happen at the same level, rather than her standing over him while he sat, or him standing over anything while his ribs were broken. "I'm going to stay in Wyoming," she said. "I've been thinking about it on the ride back. The federal compensation case for the displaced families is going to need someone to do the financial documentation. Someone who can verify the original deeds, calculate compensation values, build a complete accounting of what was taken." She looked at her hands. "I'm going to propose myself for that work to Fenn's office. I believe he'll say yes." Caleb said nothing. He was listening. "It'll take most of the year, possibly longer," she said. "I'd need a place to work from, a base." She looked up at him. "I know your barn is gone." "I'll rebuild it," he said. "I know," she said. "I want to help with that too." She held his gaze. "If you'll let me." He was quiet for a long time. The specific weighted quiet of a man who was feeling something significant and was deciding, as he always decided, whether to say it in words or let it stand in the silence. "Martha," he said. "Caleb," she said. "You came back," he said. "I said I would," she said. "I know," he said. "I didn't let myself count on it." He looked at her steadily. "I spent a long time not counting on things." "I know," she said. "Hector told me." He looked at Hector, who had conveniently found something to do at the far end of the porch and was doing it with great concentration. "He talks too much," Caleb said. "He talks exactly enough," she said. "He's a good man." "Yeah," Caleb said. "He is." He looked back at her. "You're sure about Wyoming?" "I'm sure about the work," she said. "And I'm sure—" She stopped, looked at him directly. I'm sure I'd like to find out what comes after the part where everything is trying to kill us. Something moved through his expression. Slow, deep, the movement of something that had been still for a very long time. That part might be quieter, he said. I've had enough noise, she said. Quiet sounds like exactly what I want. He reached out, slowly. The deliberate, unhurried movement of a man for whom gestures were not casual things. He put his hand over hers where it rested on the step beside his boot. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. She turned her hand over and held his. They sat like that in the late afternoon heat of a Wyoming summer on Hector Reyes's porch, with the Tribune folded in her pocket, and the Ledger in federal custody in Denver, and 47 families whose names were now part of the official legal record, and the specific solid knowledge that what had been done could not be undone, and what had been hidden could not be re-hidden, and what had been built between two people in 4 days of crisis and honesty and broken barn latches was more real than anything either of them had built in years of trying to need nothing from anyone. 6 months later, Victor Langford was indicted on 11 federal counts. Raymond Holt resigned from office and cooperated with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. Theodore Aldrich was disbarred. James Carver was convicted and sentenced to 7 years in a federal penitentiary. The Continental Railway Corporation's fraudulent land acquisitions were formally voided, and a federal compensation process administered at Walter Fenn's specific request by a financial analyst named Martha Donovan returned land or equivalent value to 39 of the 47 displaced families, with the remaining 8 cases continuing through the courts. Paul Greer rebuilt the Sentinel's press with funds raised by 11 Wyoming families who said they owed him a debt and intended to pay it. The rebuilt press ran a story about the compensation process on its first day back in operation, and the byline on that story was Greer's, and the primary source quoted in the story was Martha Donovan, and the story was accurate in every particular because Martha Donovan did not give interviews any other way. Caleb Walker rebuilt his barn in the late summer with help from Hector Reyes, 2 of Hector's sons, and a woman who turned out to be better at reading structural load calculations than anyone on the crew had expected, which should not have surprised any of them, and surprised all of them except Caleb, who had stopped being surprised by Martha Donovan somewhere around the second morning they'd spent in a barn loft watching the tree line together. He never said much about what those days had been, or what she had become to him, or what it meant that she had come back as she'd said she would, and had stayed as she had decided to stay. He was not a man who said things in words when he didn't have to. But on the morning the last plank of the new barn went up, he stood in the yard looking at it, and Martha came and stood beside him, and he said, "Better than the old one." "The frame is stronger," she said. "I checked the load calculations." "I know you did," he said. She looked at him. He looked at her. And in the space between them, in the quiet of a Wyoming summer morning, with the heat already building, and the mountains blue in the distance, and everything that had needed to be finished, there was no more distance left that either of them had any reason to keep. Martha Donovan had walked into a broken barn with a ledger pressed against her chest and a promise to herself that she would not run, and she had not run, and the truth she carried had done exactly what truth does, when someone is willing to carry it far enough and hold on to it hard enough and refuse, absolutely refuse to let it go. It had won, and she had stayed. And that was the whole of it, clear, complete, and permanent as numbers on a page.